So, I'm Steve Ronuken, and you're all here to get bored by me talking about Google Docs and the Eve API. Unfortunately, spreadsheets are not necessarily the easiest way to consume this kind of data, but it is possible as long, generally, as you're going relatively low volume. This is going to be reasonably basic, at least to get started, so I'm probably going to bore the hell out of some of you. Sorry about that, but this is also going to be a presentation I can point people out when they ask me about things. So, the Eve API is an XML-based API. It provides a bunch of data, all in a particular, in an XML format, which you have to consume with something that understands XML. Thankfully, Google Docs does actually understand XML. It can be a little painful to work with at times, but it's a hierarchical data structure, so you just work your way through each of the nodes and work your way down through them. It means you have to understand the data rather than just grabbing it out. Yeah. As you might have guessed, I didn't practice this too much. Yeah. So data is stored either is the value of a node or as an attribute on each node within it. And the Eve API tends to use attributes, which makes life a little more difficult when working with it with some ways of handling it. Two different examples. So on the left-hand side, you've got, that's from the character endpoint. I know I said that it tended to be part of nodes, but attributes on nodes. But the current time, which is up there, that is a value in a node. So you can go and you can ask for the current time. Whereas if you get down to where the implants are, you've got the row set, which is all the implants, and then you've got the rows within that, which is each of the implants that's part of a set. And then you've got, for example, type ID. That's one of the attributes. The Eve Central one, that's all just values. I know that while this isn't strictly part of the Eve API, I know a lot of people want to be able to pull this data, so I'm putting it in as an example for that. It's relatively simple to work with, but it does require a little code. Import XML. This is the way that people used to use Google Docs with XML. And to be honest, it's a pain in the ass if you want to get anything more than a single value out of it. The big problem with getting this data is, if you see here for the Eve Central one, you've got the type ID equals 35, which is pyrite, I believe. And then you've got all the data for that. Now, you can get multiple results back, so you can have your tritanium and your pyrite, or whatever you want. With import XML, you're very dependent on the order that stuff is being handed back in if you're getting more than a single value. So your big problem is if Eve Central decided to return them in the opposite order, what you think is tritanium is actually pyrite, and vice versa. That's difficult to work around, which is why, in general, I don't recommend using import XML. Also, Google updated their sheets about a year ago, I think now. And when you upgraded your sheet, import XML just stopped working. And a lot of people ran into trouble with that, which is actually why I got into dealing with this stuff. When you're working with XML, one of the ways of finding data in it is what's known as XPath. So you can go, and I want everything that's a row within a row set within the Eve API one. So from here, you've got your Eve API, then you'd have /marketstat/type/by/volume. That would get you your volume. But it doesn't specify what the type ID is, which is a little more difficult to work with. And as I said, very dependent on the order not changing. The newer way of doing it is you actually write some code to do it. Google Docs are very, very customizable. You can create your own custom functions if you've got a basic understanding of, well, to be honest, JavaScript. It's not quite JavaScript, but it's close enough as makes no real difference. You'll want to learn a little more about some of the stuff like how you do XML handling in it. But there's a lot of examples out there that you can work with. You can get, well, you've got the data coming into you and you handle how it's to go. So you can go, and I want that bit and that bit and that bit and that bit and that bit, and then return that entire row. It does mean that it's a little more difficult to just go, and in that cell, I just want the value for Titanium. But that's not a particularly efficient way of doing it if you want to use other things about Titanium. And for example, with the central API, you can request multiple at a time. Best way of handling that is you shove it all into another sheet and then look it up. I'll get onto how you do that later. So, slide with far too much text. I don't actually expect anyone to read this. This is a cut-down version of a function which will go and load all your blueprints from either your character or your corporation and just put it into a single spreadsheet. Unfortunately, it's not a complicated one, to be honest, because it's all just, you've got a row set, and then you've got rows for each of your blueprints. With something like the characters, you've got multiple row sets, so you've got to filter it to just the one that you want. So this is the cut-down version of stuff. So you're defining some values, like where to go looking for your, hate it when my mind goes blank, where to go looking for the actual Eve API. So if you wanted to go to CC, you'd change that. But it just means all the data is in one place. Then you've got get the data from, well, get the XML from the API itself. There's a URL fetch line. That's the, where was that one? The var XML feed, about 5 lines down. It just goes off and actually gets the value and sticks it into a local variable, which can then be processed. XML by itself, this doesn't go, I get the XML and now I know what it is. You have to process it into a data structure, which you can then walk your way through, which is the next thing that happens. And then you've got a for loop, which just loops through every single value. And then you just go, I've got an array, hand that back, and now I've got a result set. And it works. Yeah. So that's how you get, well, that's how you process XML. So you've got result, which is, well, sorry, get root element. That's the very base of the XML. And then you want the result set of data from within that. And then you want row set within that. And then you want to get all the rows. So get children returns multiple values. Get child returns one value. I think it's the first child. You might have to be a little careful at times. If you've got multiple row sets, that's a bit more problematic to work with. Like assets, you've got rows with row sets and then rows within those. So it's a bit more painful to work with. There are examples out there, and working from those examples is probably the best bet to learn this stuff. Yeah. So I've cut this down, so all you're getting back is the item. As you can see here, it says get attribute. So you've got your row, and that row has an attribute, which in this case is item ID. Item ID in this case isn't actually particularly useful, but it's handy as a unique identifier. And then you get the value of that attribute. The reason you've got things like get value is because it's also possible to update the data. You're not going to, but it's possible, so it has to be written this way. Then blueprints.push. Blueprints is your array of returned data. What you're doing at this point is blueprint. It's probably not the best naming structure, but I was writing quickly. Blueprint is your array of values. So effectively, your columns. So you push your column, like your set of columns, into another array, which is then each of your rows. And that all just gets returned. And yeah. Yeah. Installing custom functions. This is one which comes up a fair amount when I go, why don't you try this? And they go, I have no idea what to do with this. You just open the sheet, go to Tools, Script Editor. It will generally throw up a pop-up going, what kind of project do you want to create? And you just go, ignore this. And it gives you a very basic function called myFunction, and you just can delete that. You don't have to. It just doesn't do anything. So you want to rename it, because I don't think it lets you save it unless you do. And then you just dump your code in and use it. So this is just going through that. So Tools, Script Editor, and then you get a pop-up like that. So yeah, you can just close that one so it doesn't bother you. You don't need any of the setup that it's going to do. Then click on Untitled Project to rename it, click on Save, and it's saved. Now, when you've got all of this, it's going to return a bunch of data at you, which is not going to be necessarily particularly useful in the spreadsheet. Like if you've got your price, you've got a bunch of price data, and you only want one particular part of it. So looking that up, the normal way of handling it is VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP works. It's quite nice, but it's not great if you want to pull back multiple values. Yeah. Query, on the other hand, is great. Query allows you to, well, as you've got there, you can specify, I want some data from that sheet, or that particular set of rows and columns. So give me everything which matches a particular value. In this case, I've got it with A equals a particular value, and then it's just pulling some data out. This is pulling specifically from a sheet I've got of all the blueprint information, and I just wanted to go, what do I need to actually build this thing? And that's just looking it up. C, F, and D are just the columns. And yeah, B is the column, which is the activity ID. A is the blueprint ID. It works. It's quite handy. It generally is easier to do this when you've got a proper example of it, and you can just work your way through, and I want that bit, and that bit, and that bit. Yeah. I'm going through this a lot faster than I thought I would. Oops. Okay. Google and CREST. It is doable. It's a pain in the ass, but it's doable. The biggest problem is either you've got to create a refresh token and hand that into it and store the refresh token in it, or you have to get it so it goes out and comes back in to Google Apps. I've got some example code for it. It's on my GIST at the moment. If anyone really wants it, I'll show them, but I don't recommend it, especially when you're trying to get stuff like price data, because it's just really not suited for doing the sheer number of lookups you want if you want a lot of price data. Something like Eve Central, far, far better for this because they've aggregated everything for you. Yeah. If you want to know more, I can tell you, but I don't really recommend it. Yeah. Thank you for everyone that voted for me. My GitHub, I stick everything I've done for Google Docs on that. I stick pretty much everything else on that, and you can look at it and go, that's really bad code.
Will you put your slides?
I'll put the slides up as well, so you can laugh at them.
With the market CREST, you said that you don't recommend using it, but does Eve Central have an API for specific markets?
I don't believe East Central has one to get the entire market.
Like, I mean, like specific market hub, so I can say, this is my market hub where I live, where I work, just can you pull the market for me?
It does have an API, so you can go, give me these particular prices for particular things in either a particular region or a particular station. Or system, yeah. Most people want one of those three, so it does handle it. Yeah, I've got something specifically for getting price data from Eve Central on the GitHub. I don't think I've got it set so it's limited to a system. Might have it on system, not on station. I can't remember which way around it is. But I've got it on region and one of the other ones. Yeah. For making changes to the function which I put up, it's just a small change to the URL. The biggest problem that we've been finding with it recently is the request limit is, I think, 20,000 requests per day. And apparently some people are running into that, which seems a bit crazy. But they might, instead of hitting the number of request limit, be hitting the volume of request limit. Because you're not, I think the limit for Google is 50 meg a day on free accounts, which is pretty easy to get to. You just need to actually request them. They're not particularly big requests each, but it can really stack up. Also, they don't like it when you make a lot of requests at once, so there's a 1 second delay that you should be putting in between the requests, which is obviously going to slow stuff down a lot if you're requesting a great deal of things. You can request, well, at least from Eve Central, you can request, I think, well, depending on which ones you request, you can request 150 at a time. That's a reasonably safe number. And the code I've got up does it that way.
Does the Eve Central information include how many of this line item are available on market so that you can make sure that your market is stocked?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think it does. Just on a complete aside from this, I have recently also put up some Python code for just downloading the entirety of a market. It's possibly a little excessive because that is like 11,000 items and it gets all the order information and sticks in one large CSV. But it's available if people want to play with it. I will be making an adjustment to it reasonably soon, which is, and only get this list of type IDs. Yeah. One of the big things with all the API stuff is it tends to work on keys. So the Blueprint API is a special one for that. It actually puts a name in as well. But for the asset API, for example, or even the character sheets, it will show you the type ID for a skill or a particular item. And with that, you're going to have to do a lookup to find out what it actually is. At that point, VLOOKUP is definitely your friend. You could use query, but it's probably not the best suited for that. And if you want to use query at the end, what I'd recommend doing is you do your lookup and then you just check on that rather than you pull everything with the VLOOKUP. Right, you pull everything that you want and then you look it up. I've got example codes on the GitHub as well for doing the lookups within the custom function itself, which is quite handy when you want to pull it for everything. Mostly by going, here's a sheet of everything, load that into memory, and then just before you put it out, do the lookup. So the result sheet that you get has everything in it. It does mean that you're going to have to keep it up to date, but at that point, there's a function called import data, and you can point import data at a particular URL, and it will just grab that version. On my site, I maintain a copy of type IDs and station IDs. I think I can market IDs as well, if you want to have a more limited list. Less important, though. With type IDs, I've got it as type ID, type name, type ID. So you can look up from type ID to type name and type name to type ID. The real benefit for query instead of VLOOKUP is VLOOKUP, you look up a value on the left-hand side, and it gives you a value from the right of that. With query, you can look up a value anywhere within the list and return any particular part of it. It's something which would be really nice to have in Excel, but it's not there. If you ever want to use Excel and CREST, I really pity you. Visual Basic does not handle JSON well. I've played with it. I had it working, but you have to do it all in VBA, and you've got to load a library in to do it, and it's a pain in the neck. It's doable. I think I've got something on my website for that. I think I put up an example, but it just really is not a good idea. One big problem I've found with CREST is when getting market data, you're going to have maybe 1 second between requests if you're doing them one at a time, which means 11,000 items is going to take, that's what, 4 hours to get, which is less than ideal. You can pull multiple at the same time. With the downloader I've got it pulling 20 at a time, and that takes about 15 minutes. I could probably bump that up, and it would probably take less time, but then the application doesn't respond as much. It already does not responding whenever you're downloading them all. Yeah, I'm finished the slide pack, so I am perfectly willing to answer questions if there are any others.
Do you have any experience with the kill feed API or CREST?
With using it for pulling individual kills or using it to pull all kills to do with a particular war?
I was thinking individual kills.
I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I believe it's just you've got the kill ID, and then you just pull the entire thing, and it's a JSON blob. So it's relatively simple to work with, and I think at the moment you can download 17 million kill IDs. I think Squid's put up a list of everything the Eve kill knew about. Or it's either Eve kill or Z kill. I think it's Eve kill. But he put up a list of 17 million kill IDs, at which point someone tried downloading them all, several hundred at a time, which made Foxfall somewhat annoyed. But yeah, this really is a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. Should have practiced that. Any other questions?
Putting Google Docs, pulling stuff from the XML, how do you get that to refresh every X minutes or something?
The first thing you'll run into is Google Docs has caching. I believe it defaults to every hour. You can get around that by going to putting in what's often called a cache buster, just another attribute which has a value that changes. So you just have it and you go, I changed this value. Oh, that's changed, so I have to update this. And then it will go off and update everything. What you will find with custom functions is it will quite often hang for a few moments as it runs through.
Mine says sometimes 4 or 5.
Yeah, I'm being optimistic. But you can just have a value and it changes. Well, you change the value and it will go and update everything. Without that, it should update when someone with edit rights goes to it. I don't think it works if you don't have edit rights, but I've not played with that particularly much. It tends to, if I'm doing something like this, I tend to write something and do it on my website rather than doing it through Google, just because, well, I've got the infrastructure in place to do that. Google is great for for getting data and then displaying it. It's not so good for actually processing it in the first place. You can do it, but it's not what spreadsheets are suited for. Yeah. Was there another question up there?
Can you do the kind of the delay in the import XML too, or is it just the script?
Just to get it to delay between or with the caching?
Delay between them.
You can put in another cache buster at that point. It's just another element of the URL. It just needs to be something which is different, which makes it go, oh, that's a different URL, and get that instead of just going to what's in the cache. I have seen some people recently actually doing a manual caching as well, just to try and cut down on the number of URL requests that they've got. I've not played with that particularly much, but I know it is possible. I think it was Fu that was working on that, and I think he's put some examples up. I might be misremembering that one though. Obviously, the next presentation is going to be going into more detail on the coding stuff that you can do with Google, I think. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to be at something else. Yeah. Anything else? Or can I let you all go? Yeah. I really should have spent more time on this, but presentations are not something I do particularly well.
Are you open to being contacted out in game?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You can, well, yeah, you can email me, you can email me, steve@fuzzwork.enterprises will get to me. I'm on DevFleet on the TweetFleet Slack. I'm not on IRC as much as I used to be, just because I have to have so many clients open. If I'm in game, feel free to contact me that way. It's not necessarily the best way of doing it, just because the limitations of the chat window. But yeah, absolutely feel free to contact me, and I will answer what questions I can. And if you've got something that you want done and you aren't sure and it's interesting, give me a yell, because I like having that kind of challenge. I don't do custom code for people because I don't like having, well, if I've coded something for someone, then I feel kind of obligated to support it, and I don't like that obligation. But that's not to say that I won't write something if you've got a problem and it sounds like something I can solve. Yeah. This probably would have been better for one of the 20-minute talks. Any other questions? I will take questions on pretty much anything.
Would you recommend a good bar?
No. Yeah, the only bars I've really drunk at are Nora's and the Celtic Cross, and they both tend to be fairly packed.
Celtic Cross, you were into last night. You should have come join us.
Yeah, that was after the charity dinner, and I'd had far too much to drink at that. I wanted one of each of the bottles. So I now have those.
Where can we get the bottles?
I'm not sure.
They're serving at the micro bar. They're serving draft-wise all $12 beers. I don't know where you get the bottles.
I got the bottles at the charity dinner, so I've tried them all. They're okay.
I think the Scully bar is, I don't know if they're doing the draft or the bottles. There's the Scully bar round the corner from the micro bar.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions,
Can I come down and give a hug?
yes, you can come down and give a hug. I'd have to go upstairs to escape. Yeah. But if there are no other questions, I think we can wrap this up.